So my name is Kelli Bloomquist. As Ann said, I am the contracted public information officer for Webster County. So that includes Fort Dodge, Gowrie. I mean, we're a pretty big county. So I am not a public health person by trade, as Ann said. So I actually have 27 years of experience in journalism and public relations. So I actually started out as a radio news reporter, pivoted into a newspaper, and then I actually taught journalism and public relations classes at a couple different universities. So for many of us, we've learned and experienced through the pandemic that it just gets to be a little bit too much sometimes. And that's kind of where I was at for a while. And so as Ann and some of the members of the COP community know, I work from home and I have 7 kids. So sometimes my little ones pop up and are part of Zooms and things like that. So what I've done is I've taken my 27 years of experience and now own and run my own PR marketing and social media agency from home. And I was doing this before actually the pandemic hit. We had some, trying to see here, all of a sudden I got this wonky thing from Zoom, and let me see if it'll let me back. I don't know. I'm not seeing any of you anymore. Love computers. So Ann or Lena, you'll just have to let me know.
We can see you, Kelly.
Okay, thank goodness. I don't know.
And Ann now has sharing capacity, so we're on the right track.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I totally lost my train of thought. I promise. It's been a long week, right? We've all kind of been there. It's been a long week. So I was contracted with Webster County and doing a lot of their social media and some smaller public relations campaigns for them before the pandemic hit. And then came February of, right before we knew something was going to happen. And I talked with Carrie Prescott, our director here in Webster County, because I actually offered a curriculum that I think a lot of public health folks, as well as first responders in Iowa, have taken. FEMA calls it AWR 209 or 290, I'm sorry, AWR 290. Dealing with the media, and it really teaches people how to work with the media, what the media wants. The curriculum is now 10 years old, so as media has changed, even over the last couple of years, obviously, that has changed too. I've taught for those of us, who are really, NIMS specific, I've taught G290, which is the 2-day PIO class. So even though I'm not public health specific, I understand some of the information that you guys have to provide out to people. Ann, were you able to get logged into my account for me? Fingers crossed.
Yep, and your slides are up, Kelly.
Oh, my slides are up, okay. Because I can't see them. So
I wonder sometimes, like, if my desktop doesn't do the Zoom update, it does the same thing where it'll just like bounce around what's on my screen. So it might just be in the longer term that you need to.
Okay, I might have to do that.
Yeah, back up some Zoom, but just let me know when you want me to change slides. We're on the opener right now, and hopefully this works.
Well, my next slide, Ann, goes through all of my experience, and I'll mention a couple of times throughout the presentation today, but if you have any questions at all, feel free to shoot me an email. For the COP email, I use my personal Gmail account, but I also have Kelli at kellibloomquistmedia.com. I love to help folks. So if there's anything that you need, just please feel free to send me an email. I would much rather help than have you, be frustrated or, not be, kind of be unsure, of what you need to do. Okay, so next slide. Things I'm gonna cover in today's session. So you can do this, I promise. As we get through the slides and, we kind of talk about the things you need to know, it seems like a really daunting practice and things that you have to do. But I promise you can do this. And I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to kind of get through it. Media, friends, not food, right? So my picture that coming up is, from Finding Nemo. We'll talk about why we actually need to work with media, even though sometimes we really don't like them. We'll go through the big giant that is social media. We'll talk about news releases and how you can do interviews that are absolutely going to kill it with news media and with your demographic. Okay, so next one. We'll get into, you can do this. I know it's really, really overwhelming. I know the first couple of times when I've had to ask, as the Webster County PIO, ask somebody in the office to, hey, Channel 8's coming, or hey, the Des Moines Register's coming, or hey, by the way, the governor's coming, and there's all these media. I really need you to do this interview. It's like, oh my goodness, how am I going to be able to do this? So we're going to go over, simple little things that you can do that are really going to help you in being able to do this. So, and if you want to switch over to the next slide, and here's how I know that it is totally possible. So when pre-pandemic, I was taking care of Webster County social media, and we were doing, the typical social media that I see a lot of us doing. We were updating information about WIC. We were telling people about I Smile and I Smile Silver. We were telling them, Halloween, this is the things you need to know, all the same stuff that everybody was updating with. And the pandemic hit, and it was like, oh my goodness, we have to get all this information out to the public, and we need them to trust us as the local people and not, necessarily be watching some of the national TV or national radio and things like that. We need them to trust us because we're part of their community. So one of the ways that I did this is I took everything that I'm going to teach you today and used it in terms of social media, radio, TV, newspaper. And as a result of this, we have had, for Webster County Health Department, have had media hits every single week, sometimes multiple times, every single week since the pandemic began. And 99% of those have all been positive. So we'll go through all the ways that you can do that, because I know, and we can switch over to the next one. I know from having sat in the seat that you guys are sitting in, that communications, I apologize, my dog is in here under my desk. Communications during the pandemic has been really hard, solely because not only are we having to update the public about everything that's going on, pivot all of a sudden out of nowhere. But the biggest thing too is we've had to deal with a lot of those trolls. For those of you running social media, I am with you. I hear you. I understand when you have to shut it off at the end of the day because you think, I am the most hated person in my county. Or, people, it's just been so disheartening, the things that we've heard in terms of communications on social media. So we'll go through how we can get through that and, stay positive and everything. So, but the first way that you're going to be able to make this happen and also get positive media hits like we have here in Webster County is treating the media as though they are our friends, not food. I love Finding Nemo. My kids love it. We watch it all the time. Because a lot of, so I obviously come from a background, 27 years as a journalist, as an editor. The media is much different than when I started 27 years ago than what it is now. I left being a newspaper editor 8 years ago, and it is vastly different from 8 years ago to what it is now. And so we have to kind of, I don't want to say take media under our wings, but we work with them as PIOs or as directors of our small health departments. We have to work with them, even if we don't like them. in order to get information out to our public. So we need to create relationships with our local media. Understanding that they are a business, that they are affected by public choice. So if you have a newspaper that is not putting out any COVID information and you feel like they should be, that is a public choice of theirs. And if enough people call up that editor or that publisher and say, hey, why are you not providing this information? I guarantee you that the next day the information is going to be in there. So they are affected by public choice. They also have similar goals. Local media, those folks want to go home at the end of the day. They want to, have a glass of wine. They want to unwind and relax. They're kind of in the same spot that we are under different circumstances. As we go through news releases, it's good to know that much like health departments, newsrooms have very little staff. You would think, from TV and movies and things that these local newspapers have dozens and dozens of people. They're at skeleton staffs right now, which works in your favor. And we will get to that when we talk about news releases, how you can get them to essentially copy paste what you send them and have them run it. So when we talk about creating relationships, how in the world am I going to do this? And why do I even want to? We can switch over, Anne, to the next one. For why.
Okay, yeah, I'm on the donut slide. Is that, yeah, okay.
Yes. Oh my gosh, why is there a donut in there? I don't know.
Because donuts are magical.
They are. Oh, yes, it's been a long week. We'll go with donuts. So why do we want to work with the media? Or we obviously need to get our message out to the public. With social media, with the availability of it, with us being able to walk around with cell phones, everybody has, the capability of, getting news, but where is the first place that you want people to go or that people are going when they need to get information? So that's typically to their local news source. So you want to use them to get their message out to the public. You want to generate that call to action. We saw that and are continuing to see that when we tell, when we, put information out, we want people to wear masks. We want people to go get their booster shots. Those are the calls to action. You need to work with the media so you can establish credibility for your organization. Let's just be honest. Up until this pandemic, most people had no idea what a public health department did. Most people still don't understand what public health departments do outside of they're telling me what to do when it comes to COVID. They have no idea the programs that you're running, the staff that you have. So you have to insert yourself into those conversations so you can establish that credibility in those areas. Excuse me. And you want to keep your organization's name top of mind, which is why, as we've been in COVID, I made it a goal that Webster County Health Department was going to be in the news every single week for something positive. And even during those weeks where there wasn't a whole lot going on, we found a way to make it happen. Okay, we're going to switch over to, I must have had a slide that was deleted. So when we're talking about creating relationships, maybe this is why the donut's there, Anne. One way that I have found to do that is to call up a reporter and say, hey, if I bring coffee over to your office, can we talk about how you guys can, we can work together with the health department? I brought coffee, I've brought donuts. After one really awesome piece that our local newspaper did on the health department, I called up one of their favorite pizza places and sent them pizza with a thank you note. And all of a sudden, it was easier to get, somebody on the phone and to be able to get stories in the news and things like that. So local media, the nice thing about local media is they have to, you'll see them at the grocery store. They have to go to their kids' events at school. You'll see them at church, all these different places. So for you to be able to create those relationships, even if it's, here's a Starbucks and a donut, can we go talk about how you can help us out during Breast Cancer Awareness Month? It helps. I would always recommend setting your goals on local media. National media is fun and amazing, but at the same time, those folks fly in, they can say whatever they want, right, wrong, and otherwise, and then they get to fly out and leave, and they don't have to deal with any of the aftermath that they've created. So always keep your local folks as friends, not food. Okay, so what makes news? On the next slide. So as we're trying to figure out how am I going to keep my health department or my organization's name in the news, how am I going to get those weekly hits? These are the things that journalists use to determine if something is newsworthy. So we talk about impact. It's going to be something that affects the most people. Proximity is they only want things that are within their specific area. So if I called up the editor at the Fort Dodge Messenger and said, hey, this really cool thing happened, but it happened in Waterloo, they're going to be like, Kelli, I don't even have the time to talk to you. So make sure that it's something that's happening within your geographic region. Timeliness, they want something that's happening now, like today. And when I initially wrote the AWR 290 course, social media wasn't a really big thing. And I would teach people that, hey, newspapers, they have a 24-hour news cycle. There is no such thing as a news cycle anymore because of social media, because of cancel culture. So timeliness, what that means for us is something that's happening today, tomorrow, within the next week. Local media is not going to care if I say, hey, diabetes month is, such and such a month, but it's actually, we're in December and not talking about that at all. So make sure whatever you're contacting your newspaper about, this is actually timely. Conflict. This is one of the reasons why journalism gets a bad name. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, if there is conflict, it's going to make the news. In terms of health department information, we've obviously had a lot of conflict within the, since the pandemic began, but I made the choice and talking with Carrie and talking with Trisha, the lead nurse, that if we had conflict, maybe we shouldn't put it in the news. And so we were able to control that information. So I don't know if others of you experienced this, but we had people calling to calling and threatening us the day that the governor shut things down initially. So we didn't call up the newspaper and say, oh my goodness, you should do a story about this. We decided instead, we're going to shift it and we're going to talk about these things. But it's important to recognize that journalists will look for conflict, stories of conflict. Prominence, obviously, if somebody is more well known, they're going to want that story. So we had the governor come to town, and when we were first doing our mass vaccine clinics, and all of a sudden we went from having maybe one journalist come to cover our mass clinics to we had every single TV station, the radio station wanted clips and things like that. So prominence, anytime you have anyone of importance. And that could even be, for you, your county board of supervisor or, somebody of importance within your county. Currency, we're not talking about money. We're talking about, is it current? It kind of goes in with timeliness, but at the same time, it's something that recognized newspapers come out the next day, sometimes weekly. Radio, depending on if they're syndicated or not, it could be a couple of days before the information comes out. And deviancy, obviously, if there's, that big conflict, there's a lot of bad things that are taking place, it's going to make the news there as well. Okay, so we'll switch it over. So what types of stories do they want? This changes. And I feel like sometimes for me, so I apologize if some of this, it feels like common sense. Sometimes when I go and it's common sense to me because I've been there for 27 years, but sometimes I go out and I teach these classes and people say, well, I never thought of that. So I always like to include this information. Types of stories depend on the platform that you're choosing to use. So print media, newspapers, magazines, things like that. They want long form stories, photos, they want art, they want infographics like those pull out informations, the pull out quotes, the pull out numbers. That's what they want. Radio is completely different. They want short, concise information, usually 10 to 15 second sound bites, sometimes shorter. So when you get in and figure out how am I going to do this interview, you need to figure out how am I going to keep my information to 10 to 15 seconds. Television, they want absolutely, it has to be current, it has to be local, and it has to be something that a lot of people are going to be interested in. And so that's local spot news. And anytime you think TV, you also have to think video and images. Otherwise, if you have nothing for video and images, you're not going to be able to get a TV station to be interested in your story. And social media, the nice thing about social media is that when you initially post it, you are controlling your message. Whereas when you provide information to radio, news, TV, and newspaper, you provide what you're sending them and then hope that how it's sent out to the public is how you wanted it. With social media, you're controlling your message and how it goes out to your demographic. You can't obviously control what they do with it, but you are in control of that message as it goes back. And you obviously want to use art, images, and infographics. There's actually a lot of, so many studies have been done. And if you think about this on your own as you're scrolling through your phone, what makes you stop and read something? Whether you're on Facebook or Instagram, it's always an image. So you always want to include some type of image with your social media post. If it's just a sentence or two, people aren't going to stop and read it. They're just going to keep scrolling by because what's going to trigger their brain to stop is a really cool image. So you want to make sure that you have that in there as well. Excuse me. All right, next one. So Kelly, how do I get them to pay attention to me? In a sea of a whole lot of people, you need to be the one that's like, hey, over here, messenger. And you do that by emailing them. You do that by saying, hey, what's your favorite kind of pizza? I really liked that story that you did for us. And a lot of times I have found in my 27 years as a journalist, most journalists are poor and hungry. And so the simplest way to get them on your good side is to send pizza, donuts, coffee, things like that. And it truly goes over really, really well. So make sure that you're creating those relationships. It is so, I cannot stress this enough. Call up your local newspaper person. And if you're from, a bigger metro, Des Moines, you've got a bunch of, you've got the Register and all these other places, Waterloo, you have the Courier and all these. Find out who's covering your public health information. Typically it's one or two people, and those are your people. So those are the people you want. So if we move over to the next slide of ideas, here's some different ways you can do that. I mentioned sending pizza to the office. Send a thank you email for a well done story. Journalism, newsrooms, they are very similar to the rest of the world right now, where they are more prone to get somebody sending in an email that says how much they hate the story, they think they suck. TV stations, Erin Kiernan on WHO is, sharing all the time about how people send in emails and they're like, I hate your hair. Why did you wear that dress? This is really common in the journalism industry. I know we get them as public health agencies, people just don't like us. They get dozens of these emails a day as well. So instead of being one of those people, cheer them up. They did a really good story for you all you have to do is send an email that says, hey, I love this story that you did for us. Hey, I love this photo that you took. Thank you so much for doing this. Because what's going to end up happening is that journalist, not only are you going to like fill their bucket, but they're going to send that to their editor, who's going to send it to their publisher, who's going to say, hey, they are top of mind now. So now I'm going to remember Webster County Health Department. The next time that we need a story, I'm going to call them. And so it just continues to keep your organization top of mind. And it takes, 15 to 30 seconds to do. Send pizza to their office, ask for lunch just to discuss your organization's needs and expectations. I think the key one there is expectations. If we go back to pre-pandemic, honestly, how often did you have journalists calling, knocking on your door saying, hey, I want a story. Hey, I want information. It wasn't happening. But now all they want is information from us in terms of, how many boosters and, the state dashboard and all that kind of stuff. So it's really important to set those expectations. If you haven't done it yet, now is a great time to do it. Early on in the pandemic, I met with every single one of the journalists that I knew I was going to be sending information to. And I said, look, I know this is going to be the information that you want. Here's how I will give it to you. I said, I'll send it to you in an email. This is what the subject line is going to be, which was just in all caps, COVID-19 update. I said, as we're able to, I'll schedule you with interviews for Kelli, but I want the questions ahead of time. Now, old school, 27 years ago, and even what sometimes they're still teaching in journalism school is to those journalists are saying, never send those questions ahead of time. But the thing is as someone who's doing the interview, if you're not comfortable, you don't have to do the interview. So if you want your questions ahead of time, or if you want to know specifically what they will and will not ask you, tell them that. And it's totally okay. And we'll get into this when we dive into interviews here in just a few slides. It's okay if I set my expectation for, we're going to, today's interview, Bill, we're just going to talk about our upcoming clinic. And all of a sudden, Bill starts asking me about something completely different. It's okay to say, hey, that wasn't part, we didn't talk about this. This was not part of today's expectations. So set up those expectations ahead of time. It makes life so much easier, and kind of where you sit with everybody. Email their supervisor when they've done a good job on a story. Journalism is one of the career areas that's really taken a huge hit. And like I said, they're constantly getting, emails in about how much people, think they suck, they don't like their politics, whatever it might be. Sending an email to their supervisor, their publisher, their editor that says, hey, I really like that story that Bill did. And maybe that's all you send is one sentence. It really, really, brightens everybody's day and then gives you good rapport with them. And the biggest way that you can create relationships with journalists is to repost, share, comment on their good stories. The journalism industry is shifting more towards journalists who get more shares from the stories that they've written and posted on, whether it be Twitter, Facebook. The more reposts and shares that they get and the more comments that they get, the better off they are going to be in the hierarchy of where they sit in the newsroom, and the more freedom they're going to be given to do stories that they want to do instead of stories that they've been told they have to do. I've also heard of some where they are being compensated better based on the number of shares and comments and things like that they've received. What I've started to do during the pandemic is if there was a story that I felt they did really well, I would share it to the Webster County Health Department page and say, hey, this was a really great article that Chad did from the Messenger. We'd tag him into it. And then people who are following us, who maybe don't read the newspaper typically, would be able to see that. And I know that the publisher there has given that information to corporate offices. So that's honestly a thank you email. Reposting, sharing it takes 10 seconds out of your day. And it creates those relationships where you can kind of get what you want when it comes to putting stories out. So if we
So
switch
Kelli, I
over,
just want, oh, sorry.
Oh,
I
yeah,
just
sorry.
wanted
No,
to
go ahead.
add that Sharon had in the chat. When
Yes.
I do TV interviews, I always ask them what's their purpose and angle of the story ahead of time so I can better align my messages with what they are wanting. And she said it also helps me make friends with them without needing donuts, which I thought was a really important point, right? Like being able to control that narrative a little bit, and really like setting things up ahead of time. And I think all of this builds on each other. Obviously, once you have a relationship with somebody ahead of time, it's really easy to have these straightforward conversations with them and not feel like you're needing to buy them donuts or pizza every time they're doing something that you like, right? It's not totally Pavlovian. But then the other thing, as I was saying, is the same thing goes that you just said about the reposting, sharing comments. The same thing is absolutely true for when papers print op-eds for when people we like. So a good example is Dr. Nathan Boonstra, who is one of the co-chairs with Iowa Immunizes, with Elizabeth Faber, who's on the call, got a really nice op-ed published in the Des Moines Register. And, he lives in Des Moines, so that's, it's not too far out. But the more we can share that around as public health people and show the register through our clicks and our likes and our shares with other people, the more likely the next time Dr. Boonstra or somebody else from Iowa Immunizes or someone who's pro-vaccine submits another op-ed like that, the more likely they are to then print that as well, because they saw it as a good performer for them. So it goes beyond just stories you're pitching.
Yes, absolutely. That was a wonderful op-ed too. Yeah, and the more that you share things like that, it sends messages to the editor, the publisher, the corporate office that says, because I don't want to, I've learned Carrie has taught me during the pandemic, I generalize too much. So I don't want to say a lot. But corporate offices tend to write their own opinion pieces and publish them in multiple newspapers. And it's based on the political leanings of their corporate holders. And so the more that you have these, op-eds that are pro-vaccine and things like that, the more that they're liked, shared, talked about, the more you're prone to those opinion pieces. Instead of being really anti and super political, they're going to lean more into the audience that they're now seeing. So absolutely. And yes, very good point. Donuts are wonderful, but expectations are better. But Kelli, I'm creating these relationships. Most agencies don't know what public health is. They still don't know what public health is. I'll be really, really honest with you. And we know that because I have, worked and talked daily with the reporters in our Webster County area and even in the surrounding areas. And I'm still getting messages from them saying, oh, I didn't know that you did that. Oh, I didn't know you had a family planning clinic. Oh, you guys do well testing? What's WIC? I don't understand what they have no idea. And so this is an opportunity to kind of move out of that pandemic mindset. We're obviously still in it, but if you need a day where you say, I can't deal with this anymore, I'm going to send them a story about XYZ, and we'll get into some of the things that you can send them. It's an opportunity to educate your reporters and your public in terms of what does a health department do? And these relationships are also going to help your organization to reach mass audiences, especially in emergent situations. They're going to follow your social media, whatever platform you're choosing. One of the things that I did early on was I looked at social media and I said, who are people in my area also following in terms of public officials? So I called up the individual who runs the social media for the city of Fort Dodge. I found the board of supervisors who have the best social media following and tend to post quite a bit. School districts and things like that. And I called them up and I said, okay, we're going to have some emergent situations coming up. If I send you an email or send you a text message when we have something that we really need to get out there, will you guys share this information? And they do every time now. We had a situation earlier this week that all I had to do was send a text message, and they shared it to all of their pages because we were in a situation where people needed to know really important information. So it keeps you top of mind, and is also a really, really good way to educate people. Okay, so switching over to the next one, sending stories and ideas. So we went through the different types of news. So again, make sure that it's current, it's newsworthy, it's something that is very now. The second biggest thing, before I give you an example here, is always send an email, but when you send an email, do not send an attachment. So we are so used to, and it's still very good practice when you put your news release together, your information, to put it on letterhead, and go ahead and send it in an attachment, especially if your director says, we need to send this on letterhead as an attachment. Go ahead and do that. But what you also need to do is copy paste that information and put it into the body of your email. Almost 2 years without doing presentations, my voice isn't used to this. So the reason that I say don't send attachments is that newsrooms get thousands and thousands of emails every single day from publicists, from readers, from organizations like us. And unfortunately, they also get a lot of malware, viruses, and things like that. So it is extremely rare that you will find a journalist who will open an attachment and not be berated by their editor. So whatever is in your attachment, copy paste it, put it in the body of the email. And you can even say, this is the exact same thing that I just put in an attachment that is on letterhead. So that if they do feel comfortable opening that attachment, they can print it off or whatever. And they'll have it. But it is very, very common for a journalist to delete your email because all they see in there is that it's an attachment, even if you have that relationship, because what's to say that, your email didn't get hacked or something like that. So never send important information as an attachment. So when we talk about sending stories and ideas, here is I hear from people a lot, I don't know what to send them, especially outside of COVID, because we've been in such a COVID bubble. How do I do this? And so this is one of the ways I've been able to get weekly hits for the health department, is you have to think outside of that box. Think of all the programs that your health department runs. Think of all the things that your staff does. How can you get local news to pay attention to all of these little things? So here's an example of one that I did. And this is all that I sent him. So I literally copy pasted this out of a previous email. I said, hi, Chad, cervical cancer month is almost over and our family planning clinic did a record amount of testing this month. I'd love to sit down or send you info for a story on the importance of women getting their annual exam and how we can even help to offset the cost for them if needed. I have fast facts for an infographic for you on this too. Thanks. That's all I sent. And because I'd created those relationships, he sent an email and said, send over whatever you need and we'll run a story. And it's as simple as that. So in October, it's obviously Breast Cancer Awareness Month. This would be a great, we're a couple of days away from, November, but, send an email today and say, hey, Chad or Bill or, whoever your local reporter is, Breast Cancer Awareness Month is almost over. And did you know that we have the Care for Yourself program that we can help women who maybe didn't get an exam this month because they didn't know that they could afford, or they didn't think they could afford it. And there you go. You have an email with a potential story that would put your agency in a really positive light. So it's just little things like that. One of the things that, another story idea that I've talked with, that we're going to be running here in the next couple of weeks, and anyone feel free to steal this and use it with your local agency, is for those of us who have WIC programs locally. And if you don't have a little one, the cost of diapers has doubled. It is insane. So my 1-year-old, I wish he was closer to potty training, but when I first went to go buy diapers, 2 or 3 months ago, and thankfully I stocked up, a box of diapers was $28. And last week I went to go buy a box of diapers and it was $46. And so, for those low income, demographics that we serve, that WIC is going to be huge in helping out with things like that. So, that's another thing that, as newspapers, TV, radio stations are talking about supply chain, breakdowns, diapers fall right into that. So you can say, hey, did you know, as part of the supply chain stuff that you're talking about, diapers falls into that. And we're helping a record number of WIC families because of the increased cost of everything. So there's always, always, always ways that you can find stories that you can run. Okay, so if we switch it over, interviews. This is what freaks most people out, is having to do an interview, especially when it comes to radio and TV. I hear from people a lot, but Kelli, I think I'm going to sound really stupid. I promise you're not. And that 20-minute, 30-minute interview that you do is honestly probably going to be 30 seconds to a minute. They'll take those 10 to 15 second sound bites that you provide them, and that's what your story is going to be. So as we talked about before, and I think Ann, you said Sharon mentioned, it's okay to ask her questions ahead of time. There is nothing wrong with that. And if you have a great relationship with this journalist, most often they're going to send you their exact list of questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here's my list of questions that I plan to ask you, Kelli. We work with a lot of the TV stations in Des Moines, even though we're up here in Webster County, and they know now when they send me an email that says, hey, we want to talk to Carrie. By the way, this is what we're going to talk to Carrie about. Because we all know that public opinion tends to change day by day sometimes when it comes to the pandemic. So early on, we were receiving, hey, Kelli, this is Channel 5 News. We want to do an interview with Carrie. And that was it. And Carrie and I were like, what do they want to talk about? Is it going to be like something bad? Is it going to be something scary? Or is it something that we can be super excited about? So please ask them to provide you with the information ahead of time. It'll make you feel more comfortable as well. Provide the info to the reporter via email. Radio stations, newspapers, even TV stations, they are still down to skeleton staffs. That's not going to change. And so it is very common that Chad from the Messenger, who happens to be one of the reporters I talked to earlier today, will say, hey, Kelli, we want information on the booster clinic that you're doing. Here's my questions. And he'll email them to me because we have a good relationship. I can email back my answers to his questions and send it off, because Chad is one of 3 people in a huge newsroom and he's got 10 stories he has to do today. We all know the feeling of being overwhelmed. So providing that information to the reporter via email is another good way to do it. It also creates a paper trail. And we've used this to our advantage when we feel like we have been misquoted. We can say, well, hey, let's go back to that email. That's not what we said. And so it does create that paper trail, which is really helpful as well. And also there's nothing wrong, even if you're doing a TV interview or a live interview, if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, to say, you know what, I don't know the answer, but I'll go find out for you. It's totally okay to do that. It's not saying that you have no idea what you're talking about or you shouldn't be in the position that you're in. It's just you saying, look, I don't have that information right now and I'll go find it. We've used that quite a bit when it comes to, early on when the state didn't have the dashboard and it wasn't updated and we didn't feel like it was correct. We would say, you know what, I don't have information for you today in terms of how many positives we had, but let me find out for you and I will get back to you. And if you say you're going to get back to them, make sure that you do. And so that's perfectly okay to do. And they appreciate that as well, because then they know you're not giving them just a general, I don't know, off the top of my head, that you're actually providing them with factual information. Okay. If we go over to the next one, interviews. We have all learned so much when it comes to interviews because of Zoom meetings that we've had to do over, the course of the pandemic. So it also is very, very common for these TV stations because they are skeleton staffs. Instead of them coming in person, they will say, you know, hey, can I do a Zoom with Carrie at 4 o'clock today? And this is what we're going to talk about. So these are the things that you want to remember when you're doing those Zoom interviews. So try and face an open window with natural light. If it happens to be a day like today where there is no natural light and it is raining and it's really gloomy, put a lamp. I actually have a lamp on the back of my laptop right now, and I have a selfie ring light that costs like $9 that my kids use too. So, and then try not to have, you know, light on behind you, because then you get backlit and you just look weird and funky. So put, if you're doing Zoom interviews, just make sure the light is in front of your face. Wear solid colored clothing, or an organization polo is the best thing you could do. So if you are the PIO or you are the director, we know you have organization polos or shirts or whatever they might be. Put one of those in your go bag, keep it on a hanger in your office, so that if, you know, Channel 13 calls up and says, hey, we want to do an interview with you, and you happen to be wearing a super busy patterned outfit for the day, which more power to you, it's going to look terrible on television. So you can just change into that. I tell people a lot, just keep one, just keep it in your office and you'll just be fine. I'm going to keep talking, but my laptop just told me it's almost out of battery. So I'm going to plug it in real quick. Stay away from patterns, stripes, bright greens. Those bright greens are going to, you know, we could throw you against a green screen and make you be just about anywhere. Like a lot of those really cool backdrops that we've been able to use on Zoom meetings. So you're dressed the part, you've got a selfie light, or you're facing an open window. Everybody gets nervous, especially, you know, we're used to Zoom meetings. Can you still see me? Anne, did I drop off?
We can't see you, but we get, you're still on, like the picture's coming up. It's just your video is not on.
Anne, I'm telling you, I get a new Mac and this is what happens.
It's, you know, it's fine, Kelly. Like everyone's dealt with a technology issue this week. So I think it's fine. We're all friends here.
Yes. Well,
the content is what matters. As much as I love your
apologize.
smiling face, the content is what matters.
Oh my goodness. So, and I'll remind myself of this right now, take deep breaths. When we tend to get really, really nervous, we talk really, really fast, and that is hard for people to understand. Especially, you know, it's when people talk really fast, it's easy for other people to misunderstand what you're trying to say. So take those deep breaths. It's also okay, as we talked about on the last slide, to say, I don't know, but let me find out. I would much rather have you say, I don't know, but let me find out, instead of just trying to come up with a number or a fast fact for someone, and then be like vastly wrong. If your newspaper calls you up and says, you know, hey, the state dashboard isn't working, I need to know what your positivity percentage is, and you just happen to say, oh, I don't know, it's probably like 15% or something. And then the state dashboard updates and it's 3%. You look like a health department who has no idea what you're doing, because there's a huge difference between 3% and 15%. And then, as we talked about with video and asking for those questions, if they go on some sort of tangent, it's okay to say, that's not what we agreed to talk about. That's not relevant to the conversation. And then you can stop the interview right there. That doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean that you don't know what you're talking about. I would definitely encourage you, if they move you in another direction you're not comfortable with, to say that. Okay.
So Kelly, we're just getting some chats here that I don't know if you can see, so I want to make sure we're talking about them. So
I can only see your face. So yeah, I think I'm going to be
well
for today.
I think my mother and my boyfriend both have some sympathy for you in that, and that they're probably the only other people on the planet who had to deal with that. So I'm sorry. But Susan, Katie very kindly shared an example of a time that she was interviewed and was able to get some good airtime, which is a very good interview. And then Susan from Johnson County was just saying that their polos suck, and was asking if anyone has something better. So just kind of, I guess that's a question for the group. Like, does anybody have anything different? I will say, like, when I was doing a lot of, when I was back in DC and doing a lot of testifying, I always just kept a black blazer on the back of my chair. And then regardless of what I was wearing otherwise, black blazer usually covered up most of it.
Yes.
So if blazer's more your thing, that's, I think, definitely an option. If other people have ideas, please put those in the chat. You're getting roasted a little bit for using a Mac, but you know, that is what it is.
I'm sorry.
Hey, I mean, people have their things that they like. Yeah, I don't know. Do people have things that are different than polos? I know I've seen some people with fleeces. I don't know if anybody else has other things that they've used on interviews. And feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in.
So one of the things that we're doing at the health department right now is we ran late summer through fall, are still using our Make Yourself Heard campaign. Raygun printed us up some shirts. We printed up a second shirt design, and then that's what our staff has been wearing when, you know, we're doing clinics and things like that. Carrie has fleeces and vests and stuff like that, but the simpler, the better, I definitely think.
Yeah, I think that part about patterns is a good one. When I was interviewing for my current job, my boss actually had on just like a striped shirt, and I was like seeing holograms in him on Zoom, and that was in like 2011, so a long time ago. And then Gabby also asked a really good questions, which is just thoughts you have, Kelly, or anybody else that wants to jump in on virtual backgrounds for Zoom interviews. I know I personally don't love them because I feel like they do weird things, like they'll cut off your ear, or, you know, your mouth shape your head or something like that. But, you know, I think, you know, Kelly, you better than most, you know, like you're working from home, you have kids, you have a dog, you don't necessarily want people like seeing your, you know, what you have going on behind you. So what would you recommend in terms of background and what to have kind of like in frame?
Yeah, I do not recommend the virtual backgrounds. I mean, they're fun, and I definitely use them when it comes to meetings where I know I'm not being recorded. Like at one point, my background was, you know, Dwight from The Office, and, you know, I was sitting in Jim Halpert's spot and stuff like that. But, you know, that's just for regular Zooms. But for things like this, where, you know, your demographic is going to see you, I definitely do not recommend it, because like Anne, like you said, it's going to cut off your head. You know, maybe you lean forward or something, and then it kind of like morphs you in and out. And I think they're fun and they have a place, but I definitely don't use them. And one thing that I encourage is just kind of like, you know, when we take photos at home, you know, of our kids or whatever, we always, maybe this is just me, but I tend to use one spot in particular because I know it's always going to be clean and it's not going to be showing, you know, like piles of laundry in the back or, you know, whatever it is. Find a spot in your office that you can kind of keep somewhat clean, or that you could very easily, you know, just take your arm and throw everything on the floor really quickly if you need to, you know, whatever works for you. And I also think that as a public health official who obviously COVID is still top of mind for most people, being able for your public to see you in an office setting is still, it's that reassurance. It's a psychological thing that says, you know, hey, Carrie's still working in her office, and, you know, it's 6 o'clock at night and she's doing a live interview, you know, or whatever it might be. So take a little corner of your office and just have that plan to be where I'm going to do a Zoom thing when it comes to the media.
I will say, though, I have seen some people do it in their boardrooms, and kind of similar to what I have in the background. Like, you know, this is my window and then my messy desk behind me. So I'm not taking Kelly's advice right now, but if the only thing behind you is a white wall, I would suggest putting something up, because a white wall behind you will wash you out really quickly. So that's the only other piece of advice. So Kelly, we are on right now. I'm on the second interview slide. Do you want me to move on, or are you still on the slide?
Let's move to bridging.
Okay.
So bridging is an important interview tactic to use that circles you back to your main message. So no matter what, stop it. My gosh, my dog. So no matter what question you are asked, or no matter what track they try and take you on, you're able to circle back to your main message without actually answering their question. And the more that you do this, the more that you're going to watch television or, listen to the radio, and you're going to be like, I know what they're doing. They're doing bridging that Kelly talked about. So maybe they say, hey, the state dashboard hasn't updated, since, I don't know, last Friday. Can you tell me what the county's, information is? And I know that locally we have access to some of this information, but public facing is obviously the state dashboard. So let's say that you really don't know the information, but they really keep asking you. So you can say, well, I would hate to assume, but what I can tell you is that we're working really hard at calling all of our positive cases, and we're continuing to monitor the county, and things like that. So, or maybe they say, well, Kelly, I really want you to comment on the fact that, cases are up and your county doesn't have a mask mandate. So you need to tell me when the Board of Supervisors, I'm totally making this up, when the Board of Supervisors is going to meet so that we can do this. You can say, well, actually, what I can tell you is that masks do work. And here's the information from my, organization that I want you to know. And we always, when we're bridging a message, say, but what I can tell you is, and then it comes back to your main message that you have at that specific time. So like right now, most of our main messaging is going to be when it comes to booster shots and flu shots. So, we posted something yesterday, people commenting in terms of, well, I got the flu shot and I got the flu. So if, you're doing an interview and somebody makes a comment like that, you can say, well, that's not actually what I said. What I can tell you is the flu shot does not give you the flu because, and then provide your information. So bridging is a really, if you're doing a lot of media interviews, as I know a lot of us did early on, and some of us are still continuing to do because of the size of our county, bridging is a really important thing to use so that you can continue to kind of drill into your demographic what your main message is. So if you pay attention at all to Webster County social media or the interviews that Carrie does, one of the bridge messages that Carrie uses a lot is, but what I can tell you is we are still calling positive cases. We are still answering questions for the community on the COVID hotline, and we are still monitoring the county in terms of, I'm not using the correct verbiage. Carrie says the exact same thing every single time. So, when people say, well, like when the information about school came out, when school first started and people realized that schools didn't necessarily have to contact trace or, things like that. We were using this on a almost multiple times daily basis. We're continuing to monitor the county. It's that broken record. So if you're doing an interview and you feel like they're trying to bring you in a direction that you don't want to go, or they're asking you information that you don't have the information, and you know that if you tell them, I don't have the information, but let me get back to you, but they keep pushing, you can say, I would hate to assume, but what I can tell you is, and then get back to your organization's main message. Okay, so if we move over to the next one, asking for corrections. I get emails about this all the time. Kelly, do I ask for a correction? I feel like they misquoted me, or they had one number wrong in terms of, an article that they ran or things like that. there's some important things to remember about corrections. I think those of us in, specific arenas are really type A specific, and we want things to be correct and we want them to be published correct. And sometimes that just isn't realistic. This has been difficult for me. I'm talking about me. So asking for corrections, the things we have to remember is if it's a major error, ask for a correction. Know that when you ask for a correction, that reporter essentially gets in trouble with their editor. So if you have a really good rapport with that reporter and it's really not that like huge of a deal, if it's a hill you want to die on, then go for it. If it's not, know that it's okay. But when you ask for correction, that reporter, they get in trouble with their editor. So you have to decide, is this a big enough hill that I want to die on? And you'll also be bringing whatever, if it's a bad thing, you'll also be bringing that bad thing back to top of mind for people. Otherwise, we know that people have, a really quick mental cycle of what they're going to remember and what they're going to forget. And so if it's something that you think people are just going to forget about, then let them move on without asking for a correction. But there have been times during the pandemic that we have asked for corrections, times where we provided information, we provided quotes, and all of a sudden the story went in a direction that we have absolutely no idea how it got there. Like it was creative writing class or something. So we asked for corrections on those. And after, one or two corrections were asked for, because we knew at the same time this reporter was getting in trouble for what they were doing, we didn't have any problem with it anymore. If you work with a reporter or if an editor is constantly sending you a reporter who is, you're having to ask for corrections, they're not providing correct information, it's okay at the same time to call that editor, to call the publisher, to call, whoever that person's boss is and say, look, I'm working with this person and it is not working. They're, not providing correct information or whatever. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a different reporter that you're going to be able to work with. So just remember, if it's a major error, ask for it, but whatever that item is, it's going to be back top of mind again. Photos. I know we talked about this in the COP group quite a bit a couple of months ago. So photos, you always want, if you're able to provide local photos, those are going to be the photos that are going to be shared more because people are able to say, oh my gosh, that's my grandma, or, that's my mom or my sister or my best friend or whatever. So always try and take photos if you're able to do so that are local. As a government organization who also is involved in health, there are some legal loopholes and gray areas and things like that. The biggest thing is if you are in a public setting, there is no legal expectation of privacy. So if you are doing the, I'm trying to remember the healthiest, the walk, the healthiest walk. And
the healthiest state walk.
Okay, thank you. And you're walking around your town, you have no legal expectation of privacy because you're walking around downtown. Now, if you happen to be in your, family planning clinic office and you're talking about STDs with the nurse, that nurse can't take your photo without asking because you obviously are in a doctor's office and you have an expectation of privacy. So you definitely have to consider where you are at. And the simplest way to do this, and I have no problem in sending to you, and we can send it out maybe in the COP, the permission, the photo permissions form that I use. We've even used it for flu shot clinics. If somebody complains, we've said, well, here, why don't you just sign this form? And then we're covered legally. The simplest way is to focus on the faces of your staff when you take the pictures. If you think about it, when you are taking, think back to those vaccine clinics that you were doing or your booster clinics that you're doing right now. If you focus on the face of your staff member, you're only going to get like the arm or the side or like the chin of the person who's receiving the vaccine. So you don't have to necessarily receive, ask them for permission because you can show them the photo and say, look, all that's going to be on this is like the side of your chin. Because and you're focusing on your staff member, which is what you want. I apologize. It's those positive pictures of your organization. So as we do our clinics and things like that for Webster County, that is my main focus. We're doing a huge clinic this afternoon. And when I go in for photos, that's all that my focus is going to be. I'm going to be taking pictures of our staff who are standing and talking to people, in their cars, or the staff members who are, drawing from the vials and things like that. So the best thing you can do when it comes to photos is focus on the faces of your staff. And if you have someone, a resident, member of the community who's like, don't you need me to sign something? I always carry a couple of them with me, but I'll be honest, it's extremely rare that I've had someone say, I don't want my picture taken, or don't you have to have a permission form for that? It's been very, very rare. So next slide is questions. Are there any coming up, Anne, or does anybody have any other questions? Especially, I know photos and interviews tend to sometimes bring up questions.
We don't have a ton of stuff in the chat, lots of affirmations about what you were saying about bridging and corrections. Anybody have any of the, oh, go ahead.
It's Sharon from Madison County. The only thing that I would like to chime in, one, because I'm a nurse, and two, I've been reading some interesting data on this, is when we do photos, I encourage, or I put something on social media, or I do something for the paper, I also encourage them never, ever, ever to show me that needle, because 25% of the population is needle phobic. And if we are really doing our due diligence to try and get people vaccinated, we don't need to trigger their fear of the needle by showing that. So I do a really concerted effort not to show that needle. Now I will show them getting a shot, but they won't see the needle. They'll, see the syringe, the needle in the arm. So therefore they won't see that needle. But I think sometimes we forget, because when everybody's talking about flu vaccines and everything else, or clinics or COVID clinics, like I see lots of people that have that syringe with that needle attached, and it instantly frightens certain people.
Great point, Sharon. Thanks for bringing that up. I think that's definitely something that we should all be thinking about, just given the amount of social media that's been dedicated to vaccinations lately. So great point.
That really is a good point. And Sharon, that led me to remember the posts early on when our lawmakers were being vaccinated. There were folks who didn't understand. And again, I am not a nurse, 27 years as a journalist. I do not know the specific name for this, but there's the, so like our health department was using like the needles that they pop right back in. So there wasn't some, please, I apologize for, I don't know, specific names and stuff, but people were like, I was seeing on social media, well, I didn't see that the needle, like came out of the arm and things, and they weren't vaccinated. Actually, they were just pretending. But in reality, they gave the shot, the needle popped back into the thing. And so that's a really, really good point to make, Sharon. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I'm really curious, Kelli, about the kind of asking for a correction, if there's kind of like an in-between way. So sometimes, we don't like the way we're quoted, or I feel like, Iowa has a little bit of we don't necessarily have the problem right now, right? But as we go closer to caucus season, right, and the national media starts to descend back down and people are just interested in what happens on the ground in Iowa, we do sometimes have more of those national media outlets kind of coming in, asking questions, maybe trying to get you at an I gotcha moment. And so is it okay to email somebody and just say like, because they're probably not going to retract your actual quote, but what would you do if you were just quoted in a way where you're like, oh man, that is taken totally out of context. That is not what I meant. And now I'm like on the record in some, national publication as saying this. How do you deal with that in a professional way?
Yeah, it's hard. I'll say that. And you're really, with local media, you can ask for correction, and most of the time you'll get that correction. National media, sometimes even regional media, you're not going to get that correction, or it's going to be so buried that no one is going to see it. So what I encourage people to do is, and this is a good point, as you know, caucus season comes in and things like that, is post on your social media and say, you know, Kelli was doing an interview with, I don't know, NPR, and the resulting article we were misquoted in. This is not what we said, but what I can tell you that we did say is this. And then you're going to get a lot of shares out of that correction. And it's, once again, solidifying you as the local expert. And I mean, as soon as that article kind of, you know, is not top of mind for people anymore, and that national news organization leaves town or moves on to the next thing, people are going to forget about it. But it's still important for you as the local expert to say, this is not what I said. Here's the information that I did say, and this is why it's important. And you'll get more traction out of posting that to your social media, or you know, maybe hypothetically say that, you know, I'm just using NPR as an example. Then call up your local radio station and have that local news director do a story about it. And, you know, provide that information, so then it, you know, gets to their demographic as well. Corrections are hard. It's one of those where you have to weigh good versus bad versus, am I going to look like a jerk? And,
Right.
you know, it's tough.
All right, any more questions or comments? All right, it sounds like we're good, Kelli.
All right. And I just drank a ton of water, so hopefully I won't have a coughing fit again. Okay, so social media. This is the big giant bear in the room. And we've all found, I think, that social media has been so helpful to our departments during the pandemic. If you think about, where is the first place that you personally go when you want to find out information? So maybe, you know, you're passing an accident on your way home from work. Where's the first place you're going to go, hopefully, when you are stopped in at home, is to your cell phone. You're going to go to, you know, maybe that local Facebook group, or you're going to go to the local news organization, or, you know, you hear that the weather is going to be bad. Unfortunately, I saw a thing this morning on social media that they're talking about the S word coming in to Iowa next week. So people are talking about that. Where? On social media. So you're going to reach more people with your organization's information and news using social media than you would a lot of those traditional platforms, especially if the information you're wanting to provide is going to go to those younger folks. I've heard people say newspaper is dead. Newspaper is not dead. Radio is not dead. It's just different. And the demographic of people that you're going to be reaching is totally different. People are still reading newspapers. Some of them are reading them online. Some of them are, you know, just reading through their social media posts and things like that. People are still listening to the local radio. If you happen to be lucky enough to have a local radio station that provides local news. So it's just different, but social media is going to reach almost everybody. One thing that we've seen data on is that more people joined social media outlets during the pandemic to get information than they did prior to. My husband was one of them. He hates technology. He will be the first person to say, I'm not getting in a Facebook account. The day that he said, I wanted an iPhone, my kids and I thought like something like amazing was going to happen, because he would not use a phone except for the landline. He's one of those people. And a large number, and I don't have the data, I apologize, I'm generalizing, I don't have the data in front of me, but we saw a lot of these folks jumping on social media so that they had access to this information during the pandemic. So social media platforms. There are so many platforms and there is so much information that is out there, good, bad, and otherwise. So which platforms do we use, Kelly, and how do we use them? Facebook, most of us are using Facebook. I follow a lot of your Facebook pages. Instagram, also, you can double post things. So as you're posting to Facebook, you can use the Creator Studio and you can post the exact same thing to Instagram. Twitter, we're seeing Twitter being used by people who, just want to use short bits of information to create conversations. But also it's a good place to go to get information out. And the very, very fun TikTok. So TikTok is, I'll be honest, and I run a social media management agency. I am not a big fan of using TikTok when it comes to very specific, I need to be an authority in this area, like these are the reasons that you need to use a mask, because you have to understand the platform, because TikTok is meant to be a place where people have fun and share fun information. But this is the place where you are going to find your younger audiences. So I sat down with our nurse for our family planning clinic because we felt like we weren't reaching the audiences that we were last year. And we said, well, looks like we're jumping on TikTok. And it's really easy you just create fun little videos. So, we're already coming up with different video ideas that are funny and completely inappropriate, but fit with a family planning clinic and college kids, because that's the audience that we're trying to reach. The nice thing, and I know there's people who get super overwhelmed when we say you need to put all your information on social media. It's like, oh my gosh, Kelly, there's all these platforms. How in the world do I use it? You don't. You find out where your audience is. If you don't have a huge following on Twitter in your area, which is one of the things I started testing out at the beginning of the pandemic, and we had like no audience on Twitter. So I said, okay, look, this is one place we don't need to be right now. But are we getting the follows and the engagement on Facebook and on Instagram? We are. So find out where your demographic is, and that's where you want to go. Okay, we're going to switch over. And I have another donut picture. Can you tell that I didn't eat breakfast this morning? I was changing my slides around and clearly I didn't put a picture in there. So it's all about the donuts today. So who's using what platform and how are they using it? So Facebook, you're going to find that typically it's a huge demographic of people ages 30 to 70. Are there people younger than that who are using Facebook? They are. But again, we're hearing and seeing that younger folks really aren't using it. I will also add that with all of the 60 Minutes interview when it comes to Facebook and Zuckerberg talking about creating this different safe metaverse and all these different things, we are finally starting to see a mass exodus of people off of Facebook. But the interesting thing is that they are so addicted to Facebook that they are joining other platforms, but they are still coming back to check the places that they normally check. So I wouldn't necessarily say give up Facebook completely, because you're seeing most of your engagement, at least we are, and I know a lot of you are, off of Facebook right now. Twitter tends to be your 25 to 55 age range. You're going to find a lot of journalists who are looking for story ideas and who are using Twitter to create conversations on there. Instagram, very, very visual, tends to be ages 14 to up to 65. And you're going to find your younger folks, especially, I would say that 45 is kind of reaching on TikTok in terms of creation and things like that. But I would ages 14 to 45, you're going to find on TikTok. And as most social media is, it's a huge like energy draw from you. But TikTok is one where people get really drawn in and they say, I'm just going to, look for a couple of minutes. And then 30 minutes later, you're like, oh, well, wait a minute, I'm still here. So with all the platforms, but especially if you make the jump to TikTok, you have to find something that's engaging. And you also have to understand what your platform is used for. So Facebook, I believe most of our health departments are on Facebook at this point. and you have solidified yourself as a local public health expert. So that should be the type of information that you're sharing. Twitter is those little conversation pieces, Instagram is visuals, and TikTok is for fun, silly stuff. Okay, so if we switch over to creating content, I've seen different experts on social media say you need to post twice a day, you need to post 3 times a day, you need to post these specific times. It's called in social media analytics, it's called A/B testing, but I'm not obviously asking you guys to do that. So if you happen to notice that that if you post something at 7:30 in the morning, you get a lot of people who see it and you get shares and you get conversation, then start posting at 7:30 in the morning. But does it always have to be 2 to 3 times a day? It doesn't, because let's be honest, we're still in a pandemic. And unless you happen to have somebody like me or someone whose total job is marketing, you don't have the time for it. So I am being realistic, and I am not going to say you need to be posting 2 to 3 times a day, because let's face it, it's not going to happen. But when you sit down and you say, okay, we're going to create content for November, these are some ideas that you can do. There's a wonderful book out there called They Ask, You Answer. And I have pretty much when it comes to public health and my first response agencies, I use They Ask, You Answer as a theory constantly. So throughout the pandemic, it's very common for me to say to the staff members who are answering the phones, what are the questions that are coming in? Is there a commonality between all the questions that are coming in? And if so, those are the things you want to post about. So if you are constantly getting a question about what is the difference between the name Pfizer and Comirnaty, or, then, okay, this is a post that we're going to do. I'm going to explain what the difference is. Or for the Webster County Health Department, we posted the other day, we were getting a lot of questions and a lot of Facebook messages in from people who said, oh my gosh, this is so great. There was a comment that was made by the FDA that, kids 5 to 11 can get booster shots right away. Yay, are you guys going to have a clinic tomorrow? And it was like, okay, I love that the national media is covering this, but here's the process that it has to go through. And so they asked and we answered, and we explained the process and all the people that had, all the places and people that, had to make their approvals. So those are posts that you are going to see. People are going to pay attention to because they have the question, you've answered it and solidified yourself as an expert. And it's also going to help the wonderful people who answer your telephones, because people are going to see that and they're not going to call in with the question. So if you have, and I kind of foresee this happening in the coming weeks with PEDS doses being approved, tell the folks who are answering your phones to just, stick a little pad of paper or Post-it note. And if they are hearing a question more than twice, write it down and then bring you that Post-it note and say, hey, Kelly, we got this question 4 times today. Is this something you think we should, answer? We even have had questions come in about the onion recall. So, okay, do we need to answer questions about the onion recall or that the Walmart essential oil spray? Is this something that we need to, be answering? And so if it's a question you're hearing a lot of, answer it. Use a graphic, obviously, because as we talked about, it's going to grab people's attention. And so that's one great way to create content. Item number 2 for creating content, please don't post flyers. When you create a flyer, it's wonderful for you to print it off, post it around town, put it in elevators and things like that. But remember that 99% of the people who are going to see that flyer on your social media account are doing it from their teeny tiny little phone. And so they're not going to be able to see all the information that you've posted on your flyer. And sometimes it's way too much information. And so people will just say, well, this is way too much. I don't have the, capacity for this. And they'll just scroll on by. So instead of posting a flyer, break it down into multiple posts that you could have in terms of these are the things that you need to know. And then, hey, You've got 5 posts about Halloween that you can post throughout the entire week. Instead of saying, these are all the things you need to know in one giant document, you've created instead 5 different small posts. And please, please, please do not post QR codes on social media. Here's the reason why. I can see, I'm telling you, the only thing I see is Anne's face because my Mac is so messed up, and all I see is Anne laughing hysterically.
It's
QR
like my
code-
pet peeve in life, people posting QR phones,
Yes.
like on the thing that you would use to scan for a QR code. It kills me. It kills me.
Yeah, and I see this all the time. I saw a brand yesterday who they posted to Instagram and their entire image was a QR code. And I just sat there and went, they need to fire whoever this person is. Because here's the deal. QR codes are wonderful. They are great for those flyers that you're not going to post the entire thing on social media because you can directly send people back to your website. But when you post a QR code to social media, you have to understand that most people are looking at social media on their cell phones. So how are they supposed to scan the QR code with their cell phone that they are currently on? It doesn't work. And even if you think about, and this was a really great conversation there's a higher ed social media group of social media folks who run all the social and websites for universities and things like that. And they were like, we can't even get students to buy laptops or desktops. There's students writing research papers from their cell phones for a variety of reasons. So we can't assume that somebody is looking at social media on their laptop and then is going to be able to take their cell phone and take a picture of that QR code so they can go back to our website and be able to log in on No Wait Inside for a booster appointment. So instead of posting QR codes, use QR codes on your flyers. That's a wonderful way to do it. I've even made little things that we have on like the WIC office that sit on the desktop that people can, scan with their phone when they come in, but don't use them on social media. Instead, just put a direct link. You can use Bitly. Instagram announced yesterday that no matter what your follower count is, you can now use a link sticker. So you can directly send people back to your website. So if I'm with Anne, it's a huge, huge pet peeve, and it makes absolutely no sense. So use QR codes where they're supposed to be and not on social media. Number 3, memes. I love memes. I love GIFs, but use them sparingly. And I say this because we as public health officials want people to come to us with knowing that we are the expert when it comes to their health, the public's health. And while we have fun in the office and we love to joke around about different things and all the crazy things that people call us about, we need them to see us as that authoritative expert. So use a meme, but use it sparingly. Now, if you have an offshoot, so we have the family planning clinic. We use memes all the time for our family planning clinic. And the reason that we do it for that is that we are having to have conversations about sex and STDs with college kids and younger folks. And let's face it, nobody wants to have those conversations. They don't want to have the conversation. So how are we going to have conversations about sex and all this, STDs and all that kind of stuff? We are going to draw them in using a little bit of humor. So we use the clinics are always on Wednesday. And so we use the Mean Girls, instead on Wednesdays, we wear pink. On Wednesdays, we go to the family planning clinic and things like that. So it depends on what your voice is, but for your main accounts for your health department, use memes sparingly. Right now, we're using one for the health department of Will Ferrell, and he's shouting. And so I typed in there and I said, did you get your flu shot? And then we put information, in explaining, where people can get their flu shots. And it's done really well. But I definitely would not recommend using memes when it comes to really, unfortunately, political COVID stuff, because people are going to, they're going to use it however they want. Video updates. Video updates are wonderful. And Susan does a lot of this for Johnson County, and I love it. Anytime that Carrie does a video and people are able to see like her in person in her role, discussing the things that the public needs to know, people love it. You're going to see your click rate go up. You're going to see that a lot more people are sharing it because they're able to see in person that you are the expert and you know what you're talking about. And video is super easy to do when it comes to, just grab a cell phone and be able to do it. And the last part of creating content, community partners. Find out who your community partners are that are willing to share your information. So for me, that continues to be the city of Fort Dodge, that the sheriff's office, the police departments, the school, board of supervisors who use social media, mayors who use social media. Find out who those people are, connect with them and say, look, if we have another like really big thing where people need information, would you be willing to share that? And then it's as simple as, creating a text message chain or distribution list where you can say, hey, we're going to be releasing information on our PEDS clinic. I'm going to post it at this time. And then your superintendents, your school nurses know it's going to be at this specific time. They can share it to their pages and then their people have the information too. So those community partners are really important. Okay, so if we switch over, hashtags. Hashtags, create one for your campaign. We have one that we've been using since January 1st. We're going to have to create another one for next year, which is just stay healthy Webster County. Obviously, you can hashtag in COVID-19, vaccines, things like that. And it's a great way for people to search and find you when it comes to different social media. Find hashtags that are trending and that are also relevant. So COVID-19 is going to constantly, for the next couple of years, you'll be able to use that one. Anything, that comes in and is relevant through, the end of this month, you can use breast cancer awareness. I see, so sometimes I get questions from people about how many hashtags should I use? And there really is no like specific number, but if you have more hashtags than you actually do text, then you're probably using too many. So I typically have found with the posts that I use for clients is, 2 or 3 is plenty. Otherwise it looks like you're trying too hard. And always capitalize. And Abigail in the COP did a great presentation about this a few months back, but always capitalize the first letter of each word in your hashtag, because what that does is for people who are disabled or using screen readers, it's able to differentiate the different words that are in there. So if using stay healthy Webster County, if I left all of them lowercase, it's going to just be a bunch of gobbledygook. But that screen reader is going to be able to recognize stay healthy Webster County. And a good example of this is one that constantly is being used on social media. If you look at the example I used down there, our brain, if you look at it immediately, it is not who remembers, it's horror members. And so you want to make sure that you are capitalizing the first letter of every word in your hashtag. So really, really important. And then the next screen is just me reminding you again to please ask your community partners to share those important posts. We obviously know that there are people who are not following public health departments because maybe they're anti-vax or they're anti-science or whatever that might be, but they still need to have access to that information. And so maybe they follow a board of supervisor, or maybe they follow the city of, the city account so they know when garbage day is and stuff like that. So ask the community partners to share important posts so that people who aren't following you are also going to have access to the important information at the same time. Okay, so social media, it's a bear. I tried to kind of condense it into the most important information. Is there any questions that people have specific to social media?
Doesn't seem like there's any questions in the chat right now, Kelly. Some comments. Susan made a really good point just about sometimes, particularly for I think some of our smaller public health departments or some of the public health departments that are just, obviously people wearing multiple hats.
Mhm.
Sometimes those QR codes wind up there, not because people are actually expecting people to use them, but just because it's already on an image and it's gotten, transferred over from something else. And then Lena made a good point that, if people, maybe the way teens are using them could be a little bit different than the way adults use them, which I thought was an interesting point. And then Rachel just made an always good point, which is creating a plan for social media stresses her out. Emphasis on stress, especially as things are changing so fast. And so, Kelly, I don't know if you're going to talk about that in your next couple slides here, if you want to address Rachel's and Susan saying plans, are those still a thing? So I don't know if you want to talk about planning or just kind of thinking through how that works now, or if that's something you want to cover in your next couple slides.
Yeah. So gosh, I'll be honest, it stresses me out too. And I run an agency that does it. But when it comes to the public health side of it, like it seriously stresses me out too, because things change so quickly. I think back to one of the COP members early on in the pandemic, I think we had all just gotten off of a call together and we all knew like, we're going to post this information when it comes to vaccines. And then something changed. And I don't remember who it was right offhand, but they posted the Friends meme that said pivot. And I was like, oh my gosh, this should be our theme when it comes to social media for the pandemic. It stresses me out too. So what I have found is on days at like the end of a month, I try and create a bunch of content that's going to be relevant. So I will just kind of say, here's 4 hours today, here's 4 hours tomorrow. I'm just going to create content that I know I'm going to need for this month, or even that could be like filler for this month, that maybe is something totally different than what the CDC is providing, for like their Halloween posts, or, some of that pre-packaged stuff that they provide. That's going to be local, and I'll create that. Then I know that I have it and it's accessible and things like that. And it could be just little things like, this is the day that we're having our car seat event, or car seat safety event, or I'm trying to think of what else is on my list for this week, because that's what I'm doing tomorrow. Or things like, this is the days that we're going to be there for WIC, or even little things, Thanksgiving obviously is coming up. And so just kind of batch create content that you're going to be able to use. But pre-pandemic, I would schedule weeks ahead of time because I knew that there wasn't going to be anything, super emergent that I was going to be able to do. But now I don't do that, because I'm setting myself up. It's like Murphy's Law. As soon as I feel like I schedule 2 days in advance, something's going to blow up, something's going to happen. So I tend to post something in the morning. Like I'll schedule something in the morning. I'm up way early before my kids. And so I'll be like, okay, we're going to post something at 7:30 this morning. And then I'll kind of gauge how the day is going. And if I don't have anything, I know I've got this batch created content I can go to. But it's super stressful. I'm right there with you. So I would encourage people, if there's things that are super specific and important to your organization or the programs that you're running, go ahead and create content for that and just kind of hold it. But also kind of be prepared for what's coming up. So I know that based on how today's clinics go, that we're starting at 4:00 this afternoon, then we could potentially have another clinic coming up on Monday. So I've already sat down and said, this is what that social content is going to look like. And then we've already started planning, okay, we know peds doses are going to come in. What is that going to look like? And so we're planning that. But at the same time, know that you might spend 2 hours on what peds doses is going to look like, and somebody's going to change something. IDPH will change something. And then you'll be like, well, I just threw 2 hours out the window and I'm going to delete it. So
I will definitely say, I joke about this on the Community of Practice Facebook page sometimes, but I feel like I have gotten a ton of mileage out of the seasonally appropriate post.
Yes.
And it really helps me. So I think many of you know this, but for those of you who don't know, the community of practice, we send out a weekly email with kind of a roundup. And so I take things from emails that Elizabeth sends out through Iowa Immunizes, and things that get sent out from Lena, from IPHA, and things from the Cancer Consortium and all these different public health agencies, IDPH, you name it, and try to condense them into one email. And then we also send out some social media sets. And definitely just thinking through, okay, so Halloween is in 2 or 3 weeks. How many Halloween posts can I get in here? And then also, I am not, if you've met me in my personal life, I am not like a super cutesy, seasonally inclined person, though I do, you know, I do love pumpkin spice as much as the next girl. You know, just trying to think through like, okay, if I'm making posts on Canva, I then don't have to worry about, okay, well, what fun colors do I need to utilize, or what do I need here, right? It's just like, I know I'm going to use pumpkins or I know I'm going to use jack-o'-lanterns, right? And I'm going to steal somebody else's fun saying and like adapt them to what they need to be adapted to here. And so I do feel like, you know, as always, stealing is the highest form of flattery. So, you know, I definitely find myself looking for more inspiration from other people in terms of planning posts. But then, yeah, I also think through, I definitely have tried to get a lot more behind keeping better track of awareness days and months, not necessarily as lead content, but as filler. So especially in the last month or two, when it's like, well, we don't know we know the 5 to 11-year-old vaccine is going to get authorized. We don't know when, we don't know how quickly, we don't know what like unknown hiccups to this process might be. And so I had a lot of those posts kind of like made already, and then kind of like just change tiny things in them at the end. And so I'm definitely on board with Kelly's idea of like, I have probably like at any given time, maybe 6 or 7, like 75% done posts in Canva that are just kind of waiting for the right moment to like release them to the world. And Rachel, I know you kind of do this too, because I feel like I learned it from you. So yeah, seasonality is the best.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
So,
another
Katie.
nice way to do that too is, especially if you have, I've gotten so much traction because we have a WIC clinic, is just do a Google search on like weird holidays, and then make sure you put in your year, because sometimes they change by day and stuff, but do a Google search for weird holidays. And it will show you like today is, or I think earlier this week, it was National Chocolate Day. And then there's like National Cheese Pizza Day, or, you know, National Tomato Day, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And so those are things that you can easily create ahead of time, even like months ahead of time. And then I use them within our WIC clinic. So it's like, okay, well, today's National Cheese Pizza Day. Here's a way, using a link from Iowa State Extension, that you can make a cheese pizza that'll cost you 50 cents or something like that, you know? And so those are super simple ways that you can create content ahead of time, that if you don't have anything that you want to post that day, throw that in there and use it.
All right, Kelly, we have about 10 minutes left. So
Okay.
I'm going to advance your slide for you.
Okay. And I will try and get this. I think this is the last part. So news releases. Again, please do not send news releases solely as attachments, because your reporter is not going to see them. So things you want to include: your 5 W's plus H. I know this sounds like common sense, but as a former journalist, I would get things and I would think I have no idea what they are telling me that they want me to cover. So your who, what, when, where, why, and how. Include your most important information at the top of the post or of your news release. The reason that I say this is knowing that newsrooms are down to skeleton staffs, the chances, especially with your smaller newspapers and your smaller radio stations, of them copy pasting it is super, super high. Even we have the Fort Dodge Messenger here, and they're a pretty good sized newspaper. And most of what you're going to read in there about Webster County Health Department in the last 2 months, I wrote, and then they just copy pasted it in. So also you're trying to fit a lot of they're trying to fit a lot of information into a very small space. When you think of like, this is the amount of space I have for this article, you want your most important information at the top, so that if they have to cut information from the bottom because they don't have space for it, all they're going to do is they're going to say, well, I don't have room for the last 3 paragraphs of this. Highlight, delete, done. So the most important information always, always, always goes at the top of your release. Make sure that you include quotes because you know they are going to copy paste it. You want to solidify yourself as the local expert and you control the quote. So always include quotes. As you're using quotes, the number one way to have a journalist make fun of you is if you say, you include your quote and then you say, exclaimed Kelli Bloomquist or shouted Kelli Bloomquist. So always use the third person and always use said. Every single time it's always said. Not creative writing class. And don't use jargon and acronyms. Remember, most of the folks who are reading this information still have no idea what you do. They have no idea what any of this stuff means to you, or what the acronyms and things like that are. I'll be honest, I've been in almost daily meetings with our health department, and I still have stuff that I have to stop and ask Carrie and Tricia and say, okay, what does that mean? Because I don't know. So don't use acronyms or jargon. Okay, if we move on to the next one. News releases, the shorter the better. Because the journalist, one, if you send them a research paper, they don't have time to read it. And the less information, the better. So get all that important information in there. Make sure you include contact information in your news release or in the email that you send them, and be available at that phone number or that email address. So don't send a news release and then shut your phone off for the day, because what if they have questions about it? I'm harping again, don't send as attachment, and always include the date that you want it released. So it's always immediate release. Or if you want it embargoed, you need to say on there embargoed. Now, as a journalist, I always appreciated the publicists or the officials who would call me ahead of time and say, hey, Kelli, I'm about to send you an email that has a news release in it. I want you to know it's embargoed. And you don't even necessarily have to tell me why it's embargoed, but tell me that it's embargoed. Because so many journalists are getting so many emails a day that it's just becomes, they just automatically assume it's for immediate release. So if you need them to hold it for whatever reason, call and let them know, and then still write embargoed on it. Okay, so my next 3 slides are just an example of what this should look like. It's super, super short, to the point, and you know that they'll just copy paste the information in. So who, what, when, where, why, and how. This is exactly what I sent to the Fort Dodge Messenger. Webster County Health Department will host a drive-through COVID-19 booster and flu shot clinic on Thursday, October 28th from 4 to 7 at Iowa Central's East Campus. As a former journalism professor, I would tell you that it is not creative enough and it is not going to grab my attention, but because we are in a pandemic, anything that says COVID on it, people are going to stop and read if that is what they are interested in. So that's why it can be literally your 5 W's plus H. Then we're going to go down to the still important information, but not as important as my 5 W's plus H. Appointments are recommended, but not required. Appointments can be made by calling or online at. And then next slide. Then make sure that you include a quote. And this is a silly, ridiculous quote that we used and they ran, but it works because people know that at this point we're off having fun as we're providing this to everyone. So it's a shot in the arm to our community. It's solidifying to people that Carrie is the person who is in charge. She knows what she's talking about. We need to keep coming back to these people for information. And then the last slide there is residents are asked to bring their vaccination cards with them to Thursday's clinic. Okay, it's kind of important, but it's not as important as the rest of it. And then the very last thing that we included was how you get in and out of the drive-through clinic. So is it important? Yeah, kind of. But if they had to cut it out, would people still have the information they needed? Yes. And the next slide is just a reminder, simpler is better. Remember that you're talking to people who maybe only have like a 5th grade understanding of what you're telling them. So make it really simple. Quotes should actually sound like you said them. There's no bigger turnoff than reading a quote that sounds like somebody obviously wrote it, and the general public is not going to understand what is being said. And that's something, in our arena right now is really easy to do because we're getting a lot of the scientific data in, and we're, receiving a lot of information in terms of numbers and things like that. But if people don't understand, the general public doesn't understand how that works, it's going to be construed as just they're not going to understand. They're going to be like, well, maybe they're talking about this, or maybe they're talking about that. People are going to not follow like they're supposed to. So make it actually sound as if you said the quote that you're providing, and don't expect residents to know what you're talking about, because a lot of these folks still don't even know what you do outside of the pandemic. Okay, so next slide is questions. And
so
then
Lena had a question in the chat here, Kelly, which I'm sure other people have on their minds as well, which is particularly, Lena runs IPHA, many of us are the head of organizations, not necessarily governmental agencies, right? So if you're sending it to a big media list, right? So if you're, Iowa Immunizes, IPHA, sending things out to a statewide list because you're looking for broad coverage. How do you manage writing a good press release that is in that inverted pyramid style, but also works with, Lena, I don't know if you were asking about the embargo or the specific wording. So if you want to hop on.
Yeah, I was talking about the embargo. I appreciate having a good relationship with different reporters, and I do as well. And I have called reporters ahead of time and said, hey, did you see this? Or here, pitch story ideas. But I appreciate what you said about calling people and just, affirming that it's under embargo. But if you're sending it out to a list of 50 media outlets, how do you manage that? Or my bigger question was, do you recommend against the mass mailings and only do personal contacts?
Yeah, when it comes to embargoes, I tend to only send to the reporters that I have a relationship with, that I know they will embargo it. We all have, I think of times where I've asked for things to be embargoed and they haven't been. And I look back and I think that reporter has underserved or, needed corrections or things like that. And so I don't want to send things to them knowing that something has to be embargoed. There are reporters who, as soon as they see the word embargo, their first thought is, I'm going to get the first clicks on this. And so they won't embargo it. So I would say, don't send it to a mass list, but only send it to those reporters that you have the relationship with, because they're going to also appreciate you even more for the fact that you're sending them information ahead of time. And maybe those other reporters who don't have those relationships are going to seek it out. So that would be my recommendation when it comes to embargoes. In terms of creating better press releases, actually, and this is one of the things I was emailing about this morning that I'm actually planning to fill out an abstract for the upcoming conference on, because what I've given you in the presentation is very, very elementary. It works in getting the information out immediately. But if you're looking at larger issues and larger press releases with more information and bigger calls to action, then go to a booster clinic. There's definitely ways to write the news releases that do not fit what I just told you. In fact, you would take out your 5 W's plus H, and instead you would say, who is my stakeholder? What is their problem? And your very first paragraph is going to be how that stakeholder can answer the problem, because we know, or how your organization can help the stakeholder fix their problem, because we know as a society, people are becoming more and more selfish. So they're not going to read through a 5 W's plus H. Their immediate thought is, how does this affect me? And so you would rewrite that the entire news release. But for the purpose of short bits of information, this is what I'm going to post on social media. This is what I'm going to, see if I can get the newspaper to come out and take pictures today. I would recommend doing just a very simple 5 W's plus H. But anything above and beyond that, I would recommend this other method that I'm planning to fill out an abstract, and I can send that some how-tos to you by email, Lena.
Great. We are at time, but